April 16th, the year 2000, someone named Tom Brady was drafted. That's right, New England Patriots. One of the most famous draft cards in NFL history. 199th selection in the 2000 NFL draft. The Patriots choosing Mr. Tom Brady. Football's never been the same.
Still talking about coming back to play with him.
Yeah.
If he gets the call.
You don't really believe that, though, do you? I don't know. All right. As we mentioned, 9 days away from the NFL draft, future stars destined to become tomorrow's heroes. Just over a little bit more than a week away. Can't wait for that. And with that comes many, many mocks. Will Brinson on his third mock draft of the season. Some questionable picks, maybe. Multiple trade-ups for quarterbacks, including the Vikings moving way up in the first round. The Raiders jumping back into the mix for a second-round pick, a bombshell or two. This one's always fun to dissect.
It is, yeah. Brinson always brings the heat, and he joins us now, and we have to start with the thing that jumps out, and that's Jayden Daniels, who's the pretty heavy favorite to go number 2 to the Commanders, all the way down at 5. Why do you have him sliding that far?
Well, I think what's interesting about the top 5 here, guys, is that when you look at 4 in Arizona, obviously there are candidates to trade down. Monty Ossenfort has been shown a proclivity to wheel and deal early on in his career as a GM. However, if you're looking at that 3, 4, 5 range for teams that could trade down, I think the Patriots probably stand pat. Arizona's probably going to want a future first to move out of that spot, knowing how badly they want Marvin Harrison. And I think the Chargers will be willing to move down for less. So in this instance, the Commanders take Drake May over Jayden Daniels, which I don't think is that controversial an opinion at all. I think Drake May has a lot of upside. Hadn't played well against great defenses like NC State and Clemson, but nevertheless, certainly has plenty of upside. And I think if they went Drake May, it wouldn't shock me at all. If they went Jayden Daniels, that's fine. I just think there's a chance that the third quarterback, in this case, maybe slips down to number 5. Or the fourth quarterback slips down to number 5 with Arizona not moving out.
I knew this had everything to do with the fact that Drake May went to North Carolina. That's obviously where Will Brinson is residing.
North Carolina.
you could say you don't like it, but you're getting a lot of love to a North Carolina boy, so it makes some sense. I will say this, if Jayden Daniels does drop to number 5, yeah, the Minnesota Vikings, the Denver Broncos, the Las Vegas Raiders, I could see any one of those teams trading up to go draft him at that point. So it does make sense from that standpoint, but I don't think Jayden Daniels goes any further after number 2. I think he's pretty locked into that number 2 spot with the Washington Commanders.
All right, we're going to go to the 10th pick now. You got the Jets on the board. Protect Aaron Rodgers at all costs, going with J.C. Latham. Why is that?
Look, I think Brock Bowers is the favorite to go to the Jets. That's fine, too. That would be fun if Bowers and Aaron Rodgers got hooked up and they got him another weapon. But I think when you look at this offensive line, yeah, Joe Douglas went out and spent a free agency. You had Tyron Smith. You had Morgan Moses. That's great. But if those guys don't stay healthy, and they haven't exactly been, the modicums of health over the past few years, then you still have a problem at the tackle position. This gives you some flexibility to maybe move Latham inside, let him play guard early on, and then if you have to move him outside to tackle because of injury, you can do that. It's a guy who can be really good in the run game from Jump Street. And I just think if you're the Jets, you need to keep leaning in to building out that offensive line and making sure that Aaron Rodgers is protected, because you can get him all the weapons he wants. If he doesn't have time to drop back and stay in a clean pocket, he might not stay healthy for the entire season.
No one's going to disagree with that. I think the only concern I have at this point is J.C. Latham plays majority right tackle. Everyone seems to think that, hey, take those guys who played right tackle their whole career, throw them at left tackle, they'll be fine. That is a big-time adjustment, especially for a rookie. And you have Olu Fashanu, who's still on the board in this particular mock draft, who maybe would make some more sense at that left tackle spot, given his experience there. But also, Tyron Smith signed to a 1-year deal. He's had some injury issues. If he's healthy, that's great. But whether it's for the short term, for insurance policy for Smith, or even the long term, probably makes more sense to have a guy who's currently on the board in Will Brinson's mock draft, who's played left tackle, which is the more important side for a right-handed quarterback.
Third mock for Will Brinson. You saw he had the Vikings trading up to number 5 where the Chargers were. That gives the Chargers a couple of picks, 11 and 23, and you have them doubling down on the offensive line to protect Herbert, Will.
Yeah, I think if you look at the favorites to go 5th overall, it's I think Malik Neighbors and maybe Roma Dunze or even Marvin Harrison Jr. The consensus thought process being the Chargers at 5, having traded away Keenan Allen, having cut Mike Williams, are going to go wide receiver because they have Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer at the top of their depth chart, and that's all fine and well. But just listen to what Jim Harbaugh said at the owners' meetings. He came out and said, "Look, this offensive line needs to operate as one unit. It needs to be a fist. All five guys working together to punch you in the mouth, basically." And I think this is what the identity of what this team is going to be. Greg Roman is offensive coordinator. You bring in Gus Edwards, that physical running back. It doesn't matter who Jim Harbaugh's quarterback has been, whether it's J.J. McCarthy, Andrew Luck. I mean, go anywhere you want across the board, like Alex Smith. He is willing to run the football and allow his quarterbacks to be more efficient and take shots down the field in like limited amounts. And I just don't think they're going to come in here and throw the ball 60 times. They're going to try and run the football. And you need to improve the offensive line, especially on the right side. And then Corey Lindsey's still a question mark there at center. So I think Graham Barton makes sense as sort of a guy who can move around on the inside.
I would understand one offensive lineman here in this particular scenario, Will, but two...
Five fingers is a fist, Brady.
I get that. Getting a little rich there, though. I mean, I understand what you're trying to say, and clearly Michigan had one of the best offensive lines over the past 3 years, but they still also had talent at wide receiver, and this is a team that really has a big hole right there. So I think one of these first-round picks, you'd have to say they would devote to a playmaker or a wide receiver to help open up that running game. So teams can't just stack the box and see whether or not Quinn Johnston can get open if he can be the #1 wide receiver they drafted him to be. So I like the idea of the offensive line, just not twice in the first round. I think there's still value there later on in the draft.
You're being nicer than I thought you would be.
I was going to say, Brady likes me. Worth noting that I'm not Prisco. If I was Prisco, you'd be like...
I have to do a podcast with him for an hour right now.
Okay,
so that's part of it, too.
All right.
That's true. Worth noting, Brady, I almost considered... I really think Harbaugh and the Chargers, I think Harbaugh obviously has a lot of input here in who they're going to draft, which is different, than what he had in San Francisco the last time when Trent Baalke really had the majority of control. I think I think Brock Bowers is a really good fit for the Chargers, and I think that they would heavily consider him, especially there at 11 if he's still sitting there. So I wouldn't have a problem if you wanted to go Bowers at 11 and then you circle back at 23 in this mock trade scenario and grab an offensive lineman. I think the larger point is they're going to take an offensive lineman at some point, and I also think they're going to trade down and would love to trade down with Minnesota.
I could see both those things happening you're talking about. Just again, I think they still need some help maybe at the skill position. I will say this too, generally speaking, defensive players more oftentimes are drafted in these mock drafts and kind of, to me at least, carry the first round. And in part because I think you can plug them and play them a lot quicker. Offensive players in the NFL takes more time, takes more development. They cut down offseason, they cut down hitting. It's made it a little bit more of a difficult transition too. So that's something that I always look at in these mock drafts. And Will has allowed cornerbacks to really fall. The first one's not even taken. I don't think they're the 20s in his mock draft. I think that's a position too that the Chargers would potentially look at, even at 11. Quinyon Mitchell would be a guy that you might want to look at, especially in a division where you have to play against the Kansas City Chiefs twice a year.
We're going to talk corners now, and you mentioned they do fall. Your first corner going at pick number 25, Mitchell going to the Packers. You also have a little run going on there. So Terran Arnold to the Bucs, his Bama teammate Kool-Aid McKinstry to the Cardinals. You get a little break there, and then Nate Wiggins to the Lions. Kind of break that down for us, Brinson.
Yeah, sometimes you're doing a mock draft early in the morning and you realize you haven't had a cornerback go off the board and you got to fire a couple off really quickly. It happens. No, I mean, I think I don't think it's like an impossibility here. This is going to be an offense-heavy first round. I think. We've seen I think it's 19 is the record for most offensive players taken, and it wouldn't shock me if there were a lot more. I also think I agree with Brady. Like we could see cornerback come off the board a lot earlier. All three of those guys. In fact, four if you want to include Wiggins could come off the board a little bit sooner. But to me, you see around the NFL, and this is why I have the quarterbacks falling, honestly, is around the NFL, there is a dearth of offensive line play, of quality offensive line play. And this is one of the best offensive line classes we have seen in a long time. I think you go back to maybe the 2020 draft class when there were a bunch of first-round studs there. There's just a lot of teams that need help on the offensive line, and there are a lot of offensive linemen here. And so I just see that's sort of the way that sort of fit out, plus the skill position guys and all the quarterbacks, push the cornerbacks down. If one of them was taken earlier, it wouldn't shock me at all, of course.
See, I think scarcity is going to play a role here, Will, where you're going to see, as far as the top-end cornerbacks, there's a bit of a gap to that next group. The offensive line class, the wide receiver class, we know how deep those classes are. So if you don't get one in the first round, you can get one in the second round that a lot of these teams are going to feel pretty good about. I don't know that you're going to be able to say that about a lot of these cornerbacks that we're talking about this deep into the first round. So I think those guys, once you start getting into the 11, 12, 13, 14, you're going to start seeing some of those guys come off the board here. And in part, too, because it's hard for me to believe that Las Vegas, Denver, or Minnesota doesn't move up to take a quarterback. That'll get a team trading back. They'll find value in one of those first-round cornerbacks that they'll get that they can plug and play in right away.
Sandwiched between a couple of those cornerback picks on that run of corners for Will Brinson is a wide receiver. For the Buffalo Bills, you have them taking Troy Franklin out of Oregon. Is this a must, a wide receiver for Buffalo in this spot after losing Stefon Diggs?
I don't think it's a must. I think you can make two. I think they can make two cases against it if you want. I mean, I think everybody's going to have the Bills penciled in for a wide receiver because they traded away Stefon Diggs. And by the way, I mean, a total botch job on that contractual situation to give him that extension, to be eating the most dead money in the history of the NFL for a wide receiver. But one, you can kind of look at what the Chiefs did running their offense through Travis Kelce. I don't think it's crazy to suggest the Bills want to run the passing game through Dalton Kincaid as sort of a move tight end after drafting him high last year. They also brought in, Curtis Samuel and Mac Hollins. I mean, I'm not trying to say those guys are elite, players, but they're nice sort of niche skill guys in terms of what they bring in terms of a skill set. But if I want a guy like Troy Franklin in this thing where he can get the yak, he can burst through tackles, he's an explosive downfield playmaker, that makes a lot of sense with the Josh Allen arm on that offense. And I think you will want to see them reload. But I mean, let's not forget, this is a team that lost a lot on the defensive side of the ball as well, and they're going to have their options down there at the end of the first round. As Brady said, the scarcity is kind of interesting because you could see teams who look like obvious spots for wide receivers in the first round maybe pass and say, all right, some of these guys are going to slip a little bit to the second round, and that's where we're going to pick up our wide receiver.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Will, because with all those injuries they sustained about halfway through the season, a lot of the younger players played well, and maybe allowed them to move on from some of their older veteran pieces that might make them more apt to draft potentially a defensive player in the first round. But I like what you did here, in part because I don't know that Troy Franklin gets enough credit for the speed, the big playmaking ability. You talked about the yak, too. All those things are on display on film. He's one of those guys that kind of gets lost to the shuffle of everything. Not with Pete Prisco, by the way. Pete Prisco's got the whole better than group coming out.
I can't wait.
Troy Franklin's on
tomorrow.
No, some people look at Troy Franklin as a first-round talent. Pete thinks he likes him better than. I'm not really sure what you make of that. That whole
He's
group.
got Caleb Williams. He's got Caleb Williams on his better than team.
That's right. That's right. He really goes out on a limb sometimes with those groups. But I do think they're going to have to address the wide receiver position. Probably not once. Probably at least 2-3 times throughout the course of the draft.
All right, Brinson, you have former Chargers. Oh, go for it.
Well, I was going to say one thing, too, to consider about that wide receiver position and the scarcity, like when you get in the second round, Carolina Panthers are a team with a real problem at wide receiver. They lost out on being able to use that first overall pick. They trade, of course, Brian Burns to the Giants. They have 2 early second-round picks. Wouldn't be shocking if they double-dipped on wide receiver there. So I think if you're a team at the back end of the first round, you're considering waiting, maybe be a little cautious about that.
All right, so you have former Chargers GM Tom Telesco now with the Raiders, and you have him doing something that I'm not sure he has ever done before, trading up in the first round, grabbing Michael Penix Jr. with that pick number 30. What went into that decision?
Yeah, I didn't really feel like figuring out what the Ravens wanted to do at 30, so I figured somebody could trade. No, I do think I'm kidding. The Raiders have been connected to Penix recently. I don't know that, obviously Telesco is the GM and he's calling the shots. I do think, though, that there's going to be some a little bit of lean here from ownership to try and get this team going. This is not a situation where they bring in a coach who's got a long stretch here to really, this isn't an interim coach in Antonio Pierce. I think they need to win now. And they have Aiden O'Connell there. That's nice and well. But Penix is a guy who could be pretty interesting here with Devontae Adams, and the skill position guys around them, especially if you improve the offensive line earlier in the draft. So I like somebody trading back up to the first round to get that, what was that, the sixth quarterback, seventh quarterback? I can't remember how many I got in there.
I think it's the 5th in this case, Will. Will, do we figure out trade compensation for this particular move?
Yeah, Brady, you can check the Wikipedia page if you want to figure out what to do. No, I think the Raiders probably give up I'm trying to do the Raiders' second-round pick. I actually had it open in front of me, but I was looking at your draft class.
Oh, you really threw him for a loop there.
Wow.
No, we'll say a second-round pick to move up back into the first round. I don't think that's crazy.
There you go. I like the fit,
future
though.
first.
I think from a lot of the reasons you talk about, too, you have a number one wide receiver to rely on, kind of similar to Rome Odunze. I think, too, if you look at the comps for Devontae Adams and Rome Odunze, ran a little faster 40-yard dash time, but, a little taller. Pretty similar hand size, arms, everything else. Like, they kind of match up pretty well. So that worked out well for Michael Penix during his time at UW. Clearly, the Las Vegas Raiders need a quarterback, too. So I'd be shocked, based on the tape, if Michael Penix Jr. falls out of the first round. His tape was incredible the last 2 years. I think he's going to be a franchise guy. So this makes a lot of sense, especially in the back end, a team trading up to get a guy. So they have that fifth-year option.
You think it's going to be 5 quarterbacks in the first round, Brady?
I do.
Okay, let's go to the last pick in the first round. Again, it's the Kansas City Chiefs with that pick. Brinson, who do you have them taking?
For the record, I just checked with the ticker, and it was 77 and 44 for 30 overall. Brady, you can put that in your record since you need to know the exact details of that mock trade that I put together. Look, the Chiefs drafting a wide receiver seems pretty obvious, right? I mean, Rashee Rice has everything off the field going on. I don't think the Chiefs will necessarily be desperate to draft one. I do think the T. Higgins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing still probably lingers a little bit. They won their first Super Bowl with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, and then immediately drafted a running back with the last pick in the first round. The first pick in the second round was T. Higgins, and they could have had him on this roster all along and still traded Tyreek Hill and still not be worried about the wide receiver position. So Corley, I think, I can't remember. He's not the one who described himself. It was Quentin Mitchell who described himself as the best player in MAC history. But yeah, I think Corley, the top wide receiver available here, makes a lot of sense for the Chiefs.
All right, maybe the best player in Conference USA history, Brady.
As a top wide receiver to Will Brinson. I mean, Xavier Worthy is still on the board in this particular draft, which I can only imagine what an offense would look like with Hollywood Brown on one side, Xavier Worthy on the other, and Travis Kelce in the middle. That would get defenses headaches. Why not Xavier Worthy here?
Look, I have Corley higher on my big board, so with Corley over Worthy. I'm not you might look, Brady. You're an Al Davis guy. You probably love the speed. You're getting infatuated with 40 times. I'm more of a steak guy. I like to go to a nice steakhouse and get a good steak. You might like to go get a little sizzle. That's fine. To each his own.
They got to look good coming off the bus, right, Will? I mean, that's part of the battle and all this.
Yeah. That's right. Absolutely.
Brinson and, Brady going to have a podcast today. What are you guys talking about today? The draft, I guess, 9 days away?
I think we're doing like best fits for players in the draft. So quarterback, running back, linebackers, receivers.
All right, that'll be today on the Pick 6 podcast.